In the last part of the SOFiSTiK 2018 New Features online presentation, I like to highlight features of the graphical preprocessing tools like SOFiPLUS, respectively SOFiPLUS X, the new BIM workflow, which is enabled by the FEA extension for Revit, and I also like to point on some features of the reinforcement detailing and generation apps, as well as SOFiCAD. Starting with an overview, again in the brochure of the new features, I like to start with new features of the cross-section editor, which is part of the SOFiPLUS, respectively SOFiPLUS X graphical preprocessor. The cross-section editor has been improved to allow the definition or the easier definition of circular and arc structures for solid cross-sections. So circular parts of cross-sections can now be handled using the tangential intersection point and are now available for referencing and interpolation. Line reinforcement can be placed along circular cross-sectional elements. And of course we can influence lateral torsional buckling curves of cross-sections. To show you some of these features, I open an example project in SSD to show you the exemplary cross-sections which are defined using the cross-section editor with 2018. SOFiPLUS X is opening directly inside the cross-section editor, and you see here, for example, this could be a pier section of a bridge structure. It is much easier to convert circular AutoCAD elements now into surrounding polygons or surrounding circumferential surroundings of solid cross-section. In addition, you see here we have a line reinforcement, a circular reinforcement, which follows this outer boundary of the cross-section respectively. Another interesting cross-section type could be this composite column cross-section, where we have a lot of circular structural or circular cross-sectional elements to be modeled within cross-section editor. With these features, it should be much easier to define more involved cross-section using the graphical cross-section editor. Going one step further, looking at new features of SOFiPLUS, SOFiPLUS X, I like to open another example project, and I like to show you the additional possibility to visualize structures with an additional group coloring. The groups are very important within SOFiSTiK, and it's often very important to set up the appropriate group numbering and group structure of your system before the calculation. In order to perform this easier, we now allow in the Tools tab of the SOFiPLUS sidebar to request for a group visualization using specific color schemes. With these color schemes, it should be much easier to identify the element group assignment. Of course, there can be different coloring schemes, and you can switch back to the classical mode. Looking here in this overview of new features, we are now looking at additional new features for the input in US customary units. Of course, you can request US customary unit sets in SOFiPLUS, now also for load definition. Version 2016 did only allow Eurocode SI units for loadings. Now, in the 2018 version for US customary unit sets, you can request the usual US units for loadings like kips, kip feet, and pounds per square feet. The CIVD dialogues for the layout definition and the axis input have been redesigned, so you should have more information with less clustered dialogues. We have an improved variable input where you can have the separation, or where you can visualize the variables together to check their development and to check their input, as well as a more focused axis alignment dialog with only necessary settings. This should enable the CIBD user to have an easier input of reference axis for their systems. Finally, one of the biggest improvements in SOFiSTiK 2018 is the establishment of a complete new workflow for structural analysis and design for BIM projects. Of course, I can only give a very short overview about the features, but I'd like to point out that we now are able to start structural analysis directly from Revit Structure without leaving the program or the usual input ways of Revit Structure. So for this reason, the ribbon tab of SOFiSTiK analysis has completely been redesigned. So we only use icons which is similar to the Revit family of icons. You can now navigate easier from left to right to the necessary steps to perform analytical or structural analysis for 3D BIM models. So for example, the first step would be to generate the analysis model. So we don't talk about meshing or export, we just ask the user to generate the analysis model, and you see we can mesh all elements of the active view. I can enable the application of loads and so on. So this is, you might be familiar if you know the 2016 FEA extension, but we have new features like, for example, this analytical check, which you can perform for views with an analytical model. So for example, I can request an analytical check for this view, and I see there is obviously columns which are not supported in this view, quite obviously because it's a subsystem. Of course, I can now use this feature to get a better visualization and to zoom in on elements which seem to be unsupported for the program. So this is a very interesting feature for setting up more complicated models. Of course, you can request for the isolation and the display of these elements which seem to have problems for the product. I think this should be a huge improvement for setting up structural analysis models for larger BIM models. Of course, the material section and load nature mapping has been redesigned and reviewed. They cover now the dialogues which were called material mapping and section mapping, which you are used to from the 2016 version. If we go one step further, of course, we can request a main system calculation. I have already prepared this. So we have a main system with calculation of load cases available. So now we can, of course, request for further computation of the subsystem, as you might know. But a new feature is that you can also request that subsystem views are generated by the FEA extension automatically by levels. Of course, these subsystem views have been generated with this functionality, and of course you can now go step by step and run the calculation of the subsystems. If we look at this subsystem and request a generation, you see another new feature that the FEA extension allows to consider the load transfer from subsystems above. So the program will consider the boundary forces, the support forces of the story or subsystem above the subsystem under investigation. I've already prepared this. So if I look at the subsystem project for this level, and if I look at the applied loadings and the different load cases in WinGraph, you should see that I do not only see the loads which acts on the slab, the live load of the slab, but you also see loads coming from the subsystem column line-wise from above. So we have the load transfer already implemented in a specific way here. The next new feature is, as I said, the vision to integrate member checks, specific member checks directly into the BIM structural analysis workflow. In 2018, as a first start for this member design in Revit, we offer the column design functionality. So for example, if we look at the 3D model of our structure and we have a 3D analytical results available, we can easily request for a column design directly in Revit. If I select, for example, only this single column, I can specify a design group name. Let's just call it C1 for column 1. Get an overview about the identified cross-sectional type. I can influence boundary conditions, so this column is to be assumed to be pin supported and is also already applied with the loads from the 3D system computation, and I can directly look at the investigated load combinations, so I get an interactive first idea about the necessary combinations and provided forces. I can also get a live design using the nominal curvature method, so a preview using the nominal curvature method, so I have a first idea about the requested amount of reinforcement, and of course I can request the program to run to perform a calculation in order to obtain a calculation report. So here you see we get an output which you might be familiar with, produced by the SOFiSTiK program column. Now if we look here, see another new tool, which is the SOFiSTiK design browser, which now shows you the design groups of different members. And even more, as we had a member-wise design with this single column C1, we can do even more. We can group members together in a design group. So this design group, which was prepared already, summarizes all rectangular columns in different levels, which we see here at different locations. So we have all column members of this cross-section together in one design group. So let's assume that we just want to provide one type of reinforcement, one type of column for this building. It might be okay to perform the design in this way. And again, of course, we can influence the fixation. We can see the forces. You see, this is a lot more input, of course, because we have a lot more members, but it runs very quickly, extracts the result from the 3D calculation. The combinations to be investigated are visible here, and we have this preview of design, which is happening here. Of course, we can sort the required amount of reinforcement and get a first idea about the member design. So the next steps in this procedure would be, for example, to use member schedules to group and order the elements in a better way, because very likely you will not design all columns in the same type, but basically this can all be handled staying in Revit and using the SOFiSTiK design browser. Further options of this FEA extension are, for example, to influence the edge releases in a graphical way. Of course, I have to switch to a analytical model, and you will see that this dialog you might have there, you might be familiar with. You can select elements and influence the boundary conditions. Of course, load patterning and other tools which you might be familiar with are still available in the 2018 version of the FEA extension. Finally, I like to go back to the overview of new features. I like to point out that, of course, in the future there should be more members which are providing an integrated design, for example, continuous downstand beams or footings. I think this would be a very interesting part, leading to a complete new way of analyzing BIM structures. Going one step further, towards the end of the presentation, I like to point out that, of course, the BIM apps which are available via the Autodesk App Store are optimized to work together with the FEA extension. So reinforcement generation can be used to generate 3D reinforcement for columns, slabs, walls. And at the end of the day, the next new BIM app is on the horizon, which will be dealing with infrastructure problems. So in the near future, presumably in fall 2017, we will be releasing a labs version of the so-called SOFiSTiK infrastructure extension, which will allow the user to use parametric information generated by CABD models of bridges to generate a 3D Revit BIM model of a bridge superstructure and to perform detailing and rebar generation with additional tools. This will be clearly a labs version in order to get more feedback, to get an idea about what is requested by our users. So we would be very happy if you give us your feedback, give us your opinion how bridge and infrastructure design should be handled with BIM and Revit models in the future. Finally, at the end of the presentation, I'd like to lose some words about the detailing BIM app Reinforcement Detailing 2018, which has been released already before the 2018 release. It allows a lot more features regarding bending schedules. So we have the DocX bending schedule, we have rebar fabric shape details, we can copy reinforcement and all annotation, which is a very powerful feature. I think if you're interested in more information about reinforcement detailing, please visit our YouTube channel. There are several videos showing the new features in more detail. Last but not least, SOFiCAD offers additional features dealing with the revised label objects, which were released in 2016. So we had a lot of customer requests to make the label objects more flexible. So we now offer grip handles to be added in the label editor. So they're more flexible to influence your annotation styles, to influence your label styles in SOFiCAD. You have new features in the reinforcement schedules. We also offer the DocX template, the word-based bending schedule, so you should be much more flexible. And finally, we have new features like the browse diameter function. Of course, it should be pointed out that SOFiCAD is working with AutoCAD 2018 as a platform, and we do offer a SOFiCAD with an OEM kernel, but only for a German version of SOFiCAD. Finally, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention during this presentation. I hope that it was interesting and that you learned some aspect of the new features. I hope you will follow future online presentation and maybe visit one of the presentation days which is nearby. Thank you very much for your attention. Have a good day.